I have like all these concepts that swirl around in my head, and like I know bits and pieces from things here and there, and what I try to do is put them together in my head. Hey everybody, here I am in my orange lights, and it is going to be Monday when you see this, and I don't have my mental health breakdown going on because, again, it's kind of like a slow news week, and I don't know, I just didn't feel like it, to be quite honest. I didn't film anything yesterday. Like, I've just been lazy, you know? We all have those lazy periods, so I've been kind of lazy and almost like a little bit defiant. Here comes a car. And I just felt like breaking my own rules for a little bit, so that's what I did. But I will say, I'm going to get to the topic. Hold on, hang in there with me. I will say that there is one thing that I wanted to say as far as mental health news, and there is a campaign going on right now called 1 Million MOHAWKS, and I will put the link below, hopefully, if I remember to throw it in there. And it was launched for Mental Health Month. May is Mental Health Month. We're still in May. And it's a cool campaign. It's they're trying to get 1 million people to do a mohawk. You don't have to cut your hair into a mohawk. Just kind of like style it up. I know I didn't do it myself. My hair is horrible. I need to cut and dye it. But it's a good campaign to raise awareness to mental health issues, substance use disorders, and suicide. And it's kind of just to say, like, hey, you know, it's okay, you can talk about it. And it was just a neat way to raise awareness to get the mohawk. I like mohawks, so if it's something that you're interested in, go ahead and check them out and do it yourself. Now, I am going to talk tonight about let the car pass. That was very odd. That car went extremely slowly. Tonight I want to talk about something that's just been on my mind because I have been talking with people all day. Another car. I've been talking with a whole bunch of different people all day. I've been talking with people with all kinds of disorders. I need to move. Alright, so, you know, my hair's a mess, but that's okay. I was talking with a whole bunch of different people today. People with narcissistic personality disorder, people with, I don't know why I always forget how to say this, other specified dissociative disorder, people with dissociative identity disorder, and all kinds of different topics were coming up as we were talking. But there seemed to be a theme to everything, which was the language that we use when we describe things. And I don't know exactly where this is going to go as I talk tonight, but I have a few ideas in mind, and I'm curious to just get it out there and see what comes out. Okay, here we are. So my mind is kind of racing tonight. I'm just in a happy mood, and I don't know, for some reason my thoughts just keep going and going and going. So I'm going to talk tonight about terminology when it comes to psychology and mental health, and the words that we use and the concepts that we use, because there are different concepts out there for different things, and I don't know if people realize that. Like, when you go into therapy, you may be treating the same thing through different angles depending on the ways that you're going after something. So, for example, I don't even know how to explain exactly what I'm talking about here, but there's a therapy called schema therapy, and it's often used, I don't know, I know it through using it on narcissistic personality disorder, but I'm pretty sure it can work for all kinds of different things. So, schema therapy basically looks at the patient and says, okay, what mode are they acting in right now? And the mode is the schema. So are they acting as a vulnerable child right now? Are they acting as, I don't know the terms perfectly, so you'll have to forgive me, but are they acting as like an oppositional child? Are they a nurturing parent right now? Like, what mode is that person operating in? And you can kind of think of that as like the pattern that they're operating in. Another way to kind of think of this is to look through internal family systems therapy. I hope I'm saying that right. Again, I have like all these concepts that swirl around in my head, and like I know bits and pieces from things here and there, and what I try to do is put them together and get a more like holistic view of things and maybe give you like a basic, easier way to look at things than the way that I look at them. But internal family systems is similar because internal family systems talks about different parts of you and like how they relate to each other. So that's another way to look at things. There's also object relations theory, which I personally love. I'm sorry, the wind always gets me. Something in the air always gets my eye watering. Object relations theory is a theory that I love, and it's a very like, it's almost like a programming language when you think about it. It's how do we relate to objects? So objects, I mentioned it before in this channel, so my longtime viewers may know. It's kind of like everything in your world is an object, but we typically see people as objects. And ooh, my eye is watering like crazy tonight. So everything is an object in object relations theory, and it's how we relate to those objects that we're examining. So I gave you 3 different examples of ways to look at things, but when I look at the 3 of those different therapies, although object relations is not necessarily a therapy, but it is part of psychoanalysis, I don't see that much difference between them. I think the difference is the way that we're talking about things, and the difference is the way that we're visualizing and using metaphors for processes that are going on. Now, somebody who's a theorist might argue with me and say, no, there's a very big difference, and I would say, yeah, I guess at the theory level there's a big difference, but in practice, talking with somebody in a therapy and getting them to better understand themselves, I'm not sure that there's really that much of a difference. And please, if you feel like something I'm saying is wrong, feel free to comment and let me know that no, that's not true. But I just feel like for the person who's on the receiving end of therapy, or the person who's just looking to better understand their life, these concepts, it doesn't really matter necessarily which one you choose. You choose the one that fits you. You choose the one that feels like it's getting progress for you, and you move forward with that. If one doesn't seem to be working, maybe you switch to another. And so I think it's important that we kind of like try on words, and we try on terminology, and we try on concepts to see if they're helping us. Okay, so I said this was going to be just me like spouting all kinds of different ideas, so get ready. One of the things I was thinking about today was how we have different parts to us, and like, oh gosh, there's so many different ways to conceptualize the parts that we have. So sometimes we'll call them characteristics or personality traits. Sometimes in object relations, we may see them as defense mechanisms or patterns of defenses. Sometimes we see them simply as emotions. Sometimes we see them as alters in the case of dissociative identity disorder, for example. Sometimes we search for these characteristics and these parts in other people when we seek out relationships. And a lot of the times, these parts originate within ourselves, and they are sometimes things that we disown. So we squash them down, we don't want to acknowledge them. Other times we disown them and push them out onto other people through things like paranoia, projection, the car. Sometimes we identify very strongly with these parts and they become parts of our identity. I like to think of that as integrating. Other times we lose touch with these parts, and so we think that we don't have them, that we think that they don't exist. Maybe we seek out in other people, sometimes unconsciously, these parts that we think don't exist, so that we can be completed. Which, by the way, that's not a great way to seek out a partnership, so I'll just put that on the table, but it's something we typically do, and typically we do it unconsciously. So I guess I just wanted to bring attention to that there's different ways to look at aspects of yourself, different terminology that you can use. They do have different meanings. So like an emotion is different from an alter, is different from a defense. But in a lot of ways, they're all interrelated too. So I think that's kind of interesting. Sometimes it's kind of hard to separate a personality trait from a defense, from an emotion, from maybe an alter. So something to think about, I guess, when we talk about our own mental health. Also, I guess I just wanted to take this to a little bit further out into like a spiritual level. And when we start thinking about how we have different parts of ourselves, different parts of our identity, different characteristics and everything, and maybe we're seeking out in other people some things that we feel we don't have in ourselves. Maybe we're just like a shy person. We generally more introverted maybe, and so we seek out in somebody else who's more extroverted, and that kind of like complements us. And I think the more that we interact with each other, the more that we start to regain some of the parts in ourselves, hopefully not through trying to take them from people. That's a dysfunctional way of trying to integrate your own personality, is to project things out into other people, or try to introject, as it's called, them out of other people. But when you have a healthy relating with people and you seek it out in other people, I kind of sometimes think like this is a spiritual thing that's going on, and all of these parts are really a way to get us to integrate together and to have healthy relationships. All these things that we're seeking out in each other are ways for us to come together and to integrate as a society, as opposed to just being an individual. We integrate together into groups, and hopefully we integrate into a society, we integrate into a global population. And where I'm really getting at with this is that maybe each of us as a person is a part of a larger whole human race, and in a spiritual sense you can kind of get the feeling of what I'm going for here is that we are all one. We're all, what is the famous saying, I believe it's by Rumi, we are the ocean in a drop. And I kind of like that way of looking at things. Again, that's not necessarily a psychological way of looking at things, but I just wanted to kind of expand your mind a little bit on how to view yourself and how to view other people, and to think about the parts of you, because we are parts. In a weird way, we are whole and we are parts all at the same time. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to let your mind wander and think about that. Okay, so something I wanted to add to what I said was that you may have different parts of yourself that for one reason or another you've pushed away, or you've disowned, or maybe you see them in other people. And those could be any parts. Those could be happy parts. Those could be like loving and caring parts that maybe that's too intense for you, so you push them away. Could also be angry parts. Typically we think of them as the angry, the shameful, the guilty, the depressed. Like we don't want to think about those emotions, so we kind of shove them away. But it could be anything. It could really be anything. So that's just for you to think about for yourself. You may not have parts that you pushed away at all. What else did I want to talk about? Terminology. So there's a lot of terminology out there in psychology that I feel like we need to get rid of. There's terminology that doesn't really fit. So for example, there's a phenomenon out there that people call codependency. I've done a video on this on my channel called Codependency and Narcissism. And codependency is a term that started from Alcoholics Anonymous, and like I don't need to give you the whole history, but it started there. And Alcoholics Anonymous is not a scientific group. They're not you know, full of researchers. They're just people, and understandably they're just describing the things that they're witnessing. But I think we shouldn't be using the term codependent because it hasn't been validated. The people who write the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the APA, they decided not to include codependency, codependent personality disorder, in the diagnostic manual, which, you know, there's a whole debate on how much importance that really has. But they decided not to include it because there's nothing to show that it actually exists. And I think when people use that word, they're actually using that word as a placeholder for other things. And I think when you use this word codependent, you're not seeing what's actually going on, and that kind of frustrates me, because if you're not seeing what's really going on, then you're not going to be able to help yourself heal. So, I mean, you can argue with me. You might say, well, yes, the way that I heal is through using the word codependent and through healing that, but I don't know. For me personally, it doesn't feel right, and I kind of feel like we shouldn't be using that word. It hasn't shown to exist in studies. Another word that I see people tossing around is the word empath, and it bothers me because, yes, you may be empathic, you may have empathy. Everybody has empathy, even people who they believe don't have empathy. Typically, they have some degree of empathy. You know, I'm talking specifically about narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder here. But to say that you're an empath means what? That you have more powers of empathy than somebody else? I don't really believe in it. I'm not a believer in empath. The word empath, from what I can tell, came from an episode of Star Trek. That's the first instance that I can ever find of the word empath. So again, this seems to me like something that was taken, in this case, out of fiction, and then people started to bring it on. And you know, I think when people are talking about being an empath, I think they're either narcissistic and they're grandiose and they believe they have more powers than they really have, or there's some kind of schizotypy going on there, and there's seeing ideas of reference to some. By the way, to anybody who watched my video on schizotypal personality disorder and commented, thank you, because I appreciate reaching out and having conversations with people. And anybody who wants to comment on this video, because I know I'm kind of all over the place and I'm throwing out a lot of things, but you may have some opinions, so comment below and let me know. But I feel like the word empath is, again, using a word inappropriately. It's a word that we don't need. It doesn't really make any sense. Highly sensitive person is another one that I don't really feel like has any validity. I know some of you are going to come at me with some studies, and usually there's like only a couple of studies. It's not something that the scientific community as a whole agrees on, and that's fine. You know, I'm fine with those things existing. You can use whatever words you want to use, but I think as a whole, as a community, we need to be scrutinizing the words we use, because it prevents people from healing if we're using words that aren't appropriate. If we don't have a proper frame around what's going on, then we can't properly treat it. And I know there's like a whole debate over this, you know, the medical model and everything, but for me, I personally feel we need to be careful about the words we're using. We need to be careful about the way we say things. You know, even when it comes to validation, again, I'm jumping all over here with topics, but I know when we validate people, it's not enough to say, you know, well, why don't you do this? I discussed this in one of my other videos. When somebody comes to us for treatment, you know, we can't just pick and choose the words we want to use. We can't just say, well, why don't you just smile? Because why don't you just smile is not going to work for everybody. So we have to be a little bit more cautious. We need to be cautious, and we need to look deeper into what's going on. And I think a lot of people who toss around these words, they haven't really taken the time to study. And I mean really study. I mean go into studies, go to PubMed, go to Google Scholar, whatever you need to do to look up the studies, read into the studies, read the papers that were published in actual scientific journals. That's what I'm talking about. If you haven't done that, then you should be cautious about the words you're using. So I've noticed a lot of people using these words who are getting them off of internet forums, getting them off of internet groups like Facebook groups. They're getting them from articles in Psychology Today. I hate to burst your bubble, Psychology Today and Psych Central and some of these other websites. They have a lot of crappy information on them. There is nobody oversighting them to make sure that they publish it. And books too. Forget all of that. Even books, there's no rule that says that a book has to be scientifically validated before somebody can publish information on it. So just because it's out there doesn't mean it's true. That's kind of what I'm getting at here. And you're free to use the language that works for you. If empath works for you, if codependent works for you, then you're free to do it. I would just caution that maybe it's not the best language to use, because I have found that often when I see people using these words, it's a cover-up, it's a defense against using a different word that may feel more shameful, or may have them have to take some responsibility for what's going on in their life, you know, and just to kind of like toe the line here on what I'm trying to say is that when you say I'm a codependent, it's kind of like you're taking the responsibility off of your own choices and what you do with your life. And when you say I'm an empath, Sometimes it's like you're saying, well, I couldn't help it because my system was overloaded. Well, you may have PTSD. That's something totally different. So that's something to be aware of. So that's my little rant on all of that. Let's see. I'll see if there's anything else I have to say, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, so I just want to add a little caveat to what I just said, because I know people are going to feel like, well, you're invalidating my experience. My experience is that I'm an empath, or my experience is that I'm codependent, or my experience is that I'm a highly sensitive person. And I'm not saying you're not having that experience. I'm not saying you don't feel that way. What I am saying, and I'm not even saying that whatever is happening in your life is not happening. So please don't feel that way. However, what I am saying is that sometimes describing it with a certain context is not helpful for us. If it's helpful for you to use those words, okay, use them, but as a scientific, psychological community, I don't believe we should be using them because there's been no proof that they are real. And that's most important to me, and I'm going to make that clear here on this channel. You know, I believe in studies. I believe in I believe in science. Okay, above faith, I believe in science. I believe in faith as well. I believe faith is an important element in all of our lives, but I believe in science, and I don't think it's okay for us to just start using words that don't have a backing in science. So, okay, what else did I want to say? I wanted to say that it's important how we talk about things like suicide, because again, this is all about the words that we use when we're talking about mental health. When a suicide happens, we know that, you know, there's a website that I reference for guidelines for talking about suicide. Like, we know that when somebody commits, excuse me, see, I just did it right there. I did the wrong thing. When somebody dies by suicide, you don't say they commit suicide. You say they've died by suicide, or there's some other ways to say it. I always just choose died by suicide because that sounds best for me. You don't go into detail about how they did it, and the reason for this is because when you do, you make it more likely for the people who are hearing you, especially news media, to go ahead and do those same behaviors, because there is like a social contagion involved. So we know you have to be careful about the way you talk about suicide, and they say whenever you talk about suicide, a suicide that just happened, you should always mention the resources that people have. So 1-800-273-8255 here in the United States. That's the National Suicide Hotline. You can also text the crisis text line 741-7441. Excuse me, so 741-741. I'm just getting distracted by the cars, and you can text anything to them and they'll talk with you. Sorry, I feel bad that I'm like, see, I feel bad that I'm like looking down on you. I don't mean to look down on you, but there we go. So we know that we have to be cautious about the words that we use. We don't want to invalidate people, obviously. I think we need to choose our terminology carefully. I think we need to realize that there are different ways of talking about things, and they have all been validated to some extent, which to me just says that we're all talking about the same thing in different ways. But we do need to be careful. There's my phone again, the shadow of my phone. We do need to be careful that we are using terminology that is helpful, that is proven, that is scientifically validated. So I know I was kind of all over the place in this video, but I just wanted to talk about a whole bunch of different concepts because it's what's been on my mind from talking through to a whole plethora of different people today. I don't know why my whole day was taken up by having conversations, which I appreciate and I love. I love getting to know people. So anybody who wants to comment, who wants to chat with me, that's fine. Go ahead and do that. I don't always have the time to, so I apologize for anybody that I miss chatting with, but I like getting to know people. I like getting to know about their different situations. So what do you think about everything that I've said? Because I've thrown a whole bunch of stuff out here. Are you cautious about the words that you use? Do you think that it's okay to just kind of like make up terms and try to describe phenomenon the way that you've been seeing it? Or do you think it should be held to a scientific standard? How do you feel about the DSM, for example? What do you think about all of this? I know that's very, very vague, but if you have anything to add, please leave it down below for the community. I do mental health videos here Monday through Friday, so please subscribe if you'd like to see them, and hit the bell icon if you want to get notified each time that I do them. If you like everything that I talk about here, if you like having your mind expanded in the weird way that I kind of do it, I do provide extras over on my Patreon page, which you can support me. You can contribute some money and get some extra behind the scenes stuff and like just a more intimate discussion with me over there. So feel free to do that if that's something that interests you. If it's not, that's totally okay. I just appreciate you being here, and I will continue talking about mental health either way. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow.